Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Korea seminar series. If you haven't really met me, my name is Xiaolan Kurt Christiansen. I'm the director for Center for Educational Research in Asia. I don't know if I said correctly. And I'm also professor of applied linguistics at the Department of Education. Today, we're very honored to have Dr. Michael Moo from Australia, who is going to talk about resilience of floating children. It's a very interesting topic. As usual, we will keep the presentation for 40 minutes. And if you have any questions, please leave your question in the chat room and we will check it. We'll check them very frequently. I think Tom is going to help me keep an eye on that. So we are also very happy to have Dr. Bonnie Peng, who is going to introduce Dr. Moo. Bonnie is a member of our center, and she is also faculty member of the social sciences. She works at the Department of Health. So without further ado, Bonnie, I gave the floor to you.
Thanks, Yanan. It's my great pleasure to introduce Dr. Michael Moo, Associate Professor at Queensland University of Technology in Australia, to give us a talk today on developing the MultiRs resilience model through a sociological perspective. Michael is a sociologist in education, specializing in 3 areas of research work, namely building resilience in immigration and multicultural context, negotiating Chineseness in the diaspora, and developing teaching professionalism in inclusive education. Michael is a remarkable scholar, well-versed in both qualitative and quantitative research methods, and with expertise in Bourdieu's theorizations in many of his work. As a result of his research outputs and leadership potential, he has received the prestigious ARC DECRA in 2017 to explore culture, class, and resilience with Australian children. As a productive writer, Michael has published 5 academic books and over 50 journal articles and book chapters, and including more recently, a very interesting comic book to disseminate his research to engage a wider audience. Michael's outstanding scholarship is also matched by his extensive international professional experiences, working as a teacher and lecturer in China, and later a postdoctoral scholar in Canada before calling Australia home. On top of his research work, Michael is a principal supervisor of many PhD students, an associate editor of the International Journal of Disability Development and Education, and the coordinator of the Research Master's Program in the Faculty of Education at QUT. I must say I first met Michael when I was still a master's student in Hong Kong, and we have known each other since then for almost 2 decades. I've always valued Michael's work and appreciate his academic commitment, kindness, and collegiality over the years. And I sincerely look forward to many more of his quality scholarly work. So may I once again welcome Michael today in giving us an insightful talk. Michael, please.
Well, thank you, Bonnie, for introducing me to the audience. And thank you so much for your kind words. And of course, thank you, Xiaolan, for bringing me here today. And I appreciate the opportunity to share my research work on resilience with everyone. And of course, I would like to thank the audience for coming along today and giving me this unique opportunity to talk about what it's done so far in the past few years. So today I'll be sharing with you my resilience research over the past few years. But before that, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands where my university, QUT, stands. So QUT acknowledges the Turrbal and Yugur as the First Nations owners of the lands where QUT now stands. We pay respect to their elders, laws, customers, and creation spirits. We recognize that these lands have always been places for teaching, research, and learning. QUT acknowledges important roles Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples play within the QUT community. And I would also like to thank the Australian Research Council for funding my research over the past 4 years. Well, when I prepared for this talk, I really looked at the abstract I sent to Xiaolan some time ago, and I was very amazed by how much I promised to do for this presentation. I'm not sure whether I would be able to cover everything I've promised, but I'll give it a go. Here's just a list of things that I think I would cover today. So I would like to start with some of the background information, context information. Why do I study resilience? And how do I study resilience differently? This would help you to understand where I'm coming from. This will be followed by an introduction to my multi-year study. It is called Resilience, Culture and Class, a sociological study of Australian children. One of the key outcomes of this project is what I call a multi-Rs model of sociology of resilience. So I'll be talking about this model today as well. I'd like to conclude my talk with some final remarks on sociology of resilience. And also at the very end of the presentation, I invite questions and comments from the audience. So why do I study resilience? I have many reasons to study resilience, but a brief answer to this question is that many children I've worked with over the years inspired me. Here are just some examples, stories of some children I worked with over the years. It's rather lengthy quotes, so I'll let you read them first. So I don't know how you would feel about it after you read these quotes from children I worked with. Each time I read stories like these, I have a very complicated and mixed feeling. So as you know that most of the kids I worked with over the years come from a disadvantaged background in one way or another. But excitingly, many of them, such as Xiaoyang, were able to powerfully respond to different layers of adversities using their everyday wisdom, knowledge, skills, and they can claim power and agency despite all the structural constraints they are facing. And some of them, older kids, such as Samuel, were able to critically question the power imbalances and the structural inequalities surrounding the social world living with us. So it is stories like these prompt me to study resilience. I wanted to know their stories. I wanted to know their resilience. So what does resilience mean? Resilience is a widely cited construct that prevails in every walk of life, in our everyday language, in school education, in policy documents, in supranational frameworks, in media reports, in many other different settings and different conditions, you name it. So everyone is very familiar, is so familiar with resilience that perhaps it doesn't need any definition. However, if we do need to define resilience in a scholarly way, here is a widely cited definition. So it denotes the process of capacity for an outcome of successful adaptation despite challenges and threatening circumstances. I'm not totally comfortable with the notion of successful adaptation. I'll be sharing with my view about that as I go. But as you can see, these are some of the books I published over the years, building on my resilience research. The titles of these books suggest the shift of my worldviews and my viewpoints about resilience. The first book is called Living with Vulnerabilities and Opportunities in the Migration Context. So for most part of this work, I talked about the vulnerabilities of floating children and left behind children in China. It was not until when I nearly finished the book did I realize that I had a big problem. I think the book was too much about their vulnerabilities. Are they vulnerable? Are they disadvantaged? Yes, they are. But vulnerability and disadvantage are just part of their life stories. So I asked myself, where did my deficit perspective towards these children coming from? So I was thinking maybe that was the social distance between myself and these children. I was privileged to be born and brought up in a fairly comfortable family background. So I actually won the lottery of birth as compared to these children. I had all the opportunities that these children never had. So this created some social distance and power imbalance between myself and these children. When I started to study them, I predefined them as disadvantaged children. I think that was where my deficit perspective toward these children were coming from. It came from my position of being the center and a disposition of being used to being the center. And that was a big problem for me. So by doing this research, I was able to shift my viewpoints toward these children. The problem came to my attention rather late when I wrote my first book, but it was not too late. I still got 1 chapter, 2 chapters left for that book. So for the last 2 chapters, I shifted completely. I took a positive perspective and I started to talk about their resilience. And this leads to the second book, Building Resilience of Floating Children, the Left Behind Children in China. That was in an internal migration context. Then I extended my work to an international migration context. So I worked with my colleague friend Bonnie. So we looked at socialization, identity, and resilience of Chinese Australian and Chinese Canadian young people. So far, so good. But I'm yet to address another problem, which has plagued me for a long time. For a long time over my research career, I wasn't able to return anything directly to the children I worked with. All what I did was I went to their home, I went to the school, I talked to them, I interviewed them, and then I left. I published what I've learned from them in scholarly books, in scholarly publications. But here's the problem. Children don't read my publications. Children don't care who Bourdieu is. Children don't read sociology of education. Children don't care about resilience theory. However, they do and think resilience every day. So that prompted me to write something directly for them. So I did this picture book for these children and using their wisdom, using their languages and vocabularies so that they can share with my ideas, so that they can engage with me in a more productive way. And my ambition is to develop the picture book into a picture book series called Journey to Resilience. So I'm currently working on the second picture book, building on my previous research with these children. And as you can see, this picture book and the scholarly book beside it constitute a couple or pair. So the picture book is for children, families, teachers. And the scholarly book called Sociologizing Child Youth Resilience with Bourdieu is for scholars and academics. So this is just a brief revisit to my journey to resilience. Some of you might have already noticed that I started my resilience research from floating children and left behind children. So who are they? So this is a brief image of these children. So briefly, floating children refers to those who were brought to the cities by their migrant parents, but they do not have equal access to the social benefits and educational opportunities enjoyed by their urban peers. Many of the children, floating children I worked with, lived on the skirt of the cities. The parents were very busy all day, all the time, all year round. So the parents don't have time to look after them. On a typical school day, if you went to the city outskirts like this, you would see floating children just lingering on the streets, and they would just eating street food to feed themselves. So this is their life. Because of this social and educational barriers faced by these children, some migrant parents have to painfully leave their children behind in the rural communities when they themselves move to cities for work. And these left behind children were looked after by their grandparents, relatives, and some of them are looked after by the teachers in the schools because they don't have any other caregivers at home. But they barely see their parents because their parents work in the cities. If they're lucky enough, they would be able to see their parents once or twice a year. As you see in the picture, that little girl missed her mother so much. She hasn't seen her mother for a long time. But her mother had to leave the rural community and return to cities for work again. As you can see, she chased her mother all the way because she just didn't want her mom to leave the rural communities. So these are the stories about these floating children, left behind children. And the scale, the population of these children is massive. So we're talking about a number approaching to 27 million of floating children, left behind children in China. It is one Australia. And it also equals, I don't know, perhaps 1/3 England. So the population is massive. So I started my resilience research with these children. I had to confess that I completed the project a few years ago. I haven't done anything properly afterwards. I haven't read the literature about them properly afterwards. These literature I cited were old literatures. They were a bit outdated, but as you can see, that literature was inundated with the deficit discourses towards these children. I don't want to read them for you because they were too negative, but I just want to share with you, when I started this literature, it was just inundated with the deficit discourse of floating children, left behind children. So I was guided by this literature and I started my research about these children. I started to compare, I did a statistical comparison between typically developing children and floating children, left behind children. It actually didn't surprise me. I got what all the literature said, which is very disappointing and very sad. As you can see in the statistics in the table on the left-hand side, floating children, left behind children were consistently, statistically significantly disadvantaged across multiple domains as compared to typically developing children. And this wasn't new, this was documented in the literature, and I found that as well. I found myself simply repeating of what I've learned from the literature. I wanted to do something different. I wanted to do something new. So on the right-hand side, it's just a scatter plot, one example. So statistically, as you can see, adversity and children's sense of well-being has a negative relationship. That is very sad. But what was exciting was if we look at the red dots on the top right corner, they were statistical outliers. Despite exposure to a high level of adversity, they were able to demonstrate a high level of well-being. So they are powerful kids, they are resilient kids. So this is my focus of the study in the forthcoming years. I wanted to understand why some of the kids were able to deviate themselves from the model trajectory, why they were able to powerfully respond to the adversities. So this is my, the true reasons why I'm interested in resilience research. So I wanted to do something differently. I am a Bourdieusian sociologist of education, so I looked at a lot of educational problems through a Bourdieusian lens. So when I looked at resilience through a Bourdieusian lens, some of the points of departure are quite some. I would like to point some of my points of departure up front. So resilience, whether in everyday language or in the literature, is assumed as a positive construct. But since I do sociology, sociology is critical. So from a critical sociological perspective, resilience is not necessarily a positive construct. Rather, I understand resilience as a highly contentious human construct, psychologically and sociologically, anthropologically and scientifically. We don't have time to unpack all these contentions today, but as I go, I will show you some of the contentions and tensions surrounding the notion of resilience. I also need to acknowledge that 5 decades of psychological research have created a solid foundation of child youth resilience research. So I acknowledge that my research is built on that, but I do something differently because sociology of resilience is not merely about individual adaptation to adversities, but it's more about the structural level change. It also grapples with the invisible forces behind visible adversities. I do resilience sociologically, so I reframed the traditional psychological notion of resilience through a Bourdieusian lens. I'm aware that not all of you are interested in Bourdieu, so I'm not going to talk about this model in detail, but very briefly, the resilience theory is built on 3 pillars: exposure to risk, secondly, protective and promotive factors, and thirdly, positive outcomes. So I reframed each of the domains of resilience through a Bourdieusian lens, and I come up with this model. If you're interested, I invite you to read my publication showing at the end of the screen. So my work on sociological resilience was founded on this sociological model according to Bourdieu. And here is my multi-year project. So it's called Resilience Quotient Class, a sociological study of Australian children. It was funded by the Australian Research Council for 4 years. So I'm privileged to receive a significant funding from Australian Research Council. And one of the major outcome of this project, as I introduced earlier, is the forthcoming book called Sociologizing Child Youth Resilience. So this project works with years 4 to 9 students in 5 schools in Southeast Queensland. So as you can see, I marked the 5 suburbs on the map. The red flag on the Australian map is where Brisbane is located. That is located in the central eastern coast of Australia. And this is where I'm zooming you from. And as you can see, my 5 research schools were actually not located in Brisbane. They were located about 50 kilometers to the north of Brisbane and 20 kilometers to the south of Brisbane. So that's how I work with my 5 research schools. There were 4 stages: focus group, individual interview, survey, and follow-up interview. And in the table, you can see I demonstrated the school profile. The schools are all different. They demonstrate they all demonstrate a linguistic and cultural diversity, as you can see in some of the information here. I do want to introduce you to ICSA and LBOT. So in Australia, we use ICSA and LBOT to measure the educational, socio-educational advantage of a school. and the linguistic and cultural diversity of the school. And as you can see, those 5 schools varied a lot in their HCF value and Albert value. So today I'll be focused very much on part of my interview findings. Here is a profile of my interview participants. I did 20 focus group interviews, including 58 students altogether. And then this was followed by 44 individual interviews. Altogether, I worked with 102 students in the interview stage. And these students demonstrated a great deal of demographic variances. So in order to understand this sample, I did something called multiple correspondence analysis. And from this analysis, it helped me to understand the relative homogeneity and heterogeneity within the interview sample. On the right-hand side of the figure, you can see relatively, there were 3 socially similar groups of children. And if we look at the figure on the right-hand side, it tells us how different or how dissimilar these groups are. So the groups on top of the plot were from mostly were from a Middle Eastern background, and most of them had a religious background, and they came from a school with a moderate socio-educational advantage. The group of children on the bottom left of the plot were composed of children from socioeconomically disadvantaged backgrounds. They went to a school which lacks of multiculturality. But if they come from a minority background, they tend to be from an African background or white working class background. The group on the bottom right-hand side came from an socioeducationally advantaged background. They went to a school which is very multicultural, which is very diverse, and their school performance was above average, and they were likely to have a Chinese background, interestingly. So building on my interviews with the 102 kids, I developed this model called MultiRs, model of sociology of resilience. There were 7 resilience strategies: resolution, reconciliation, recalcitrance, retreat, redirection, reconstruction, reflexivity. Each of these 7 strategies was very rich and interesting. I perhaps wouldn't be able to show you everything today, but I promise I'll show you something about each of these 7 strategies. And also interesting is that all these 7 strategies were coexisting, and sometimes they were conflicting strategies. So they do not necessarily always go together. Sometimes there were tensions among these 7 strategies. So let's look at them one by one. The first strategy is called resolution. It is about persistence and consistence. So when I asked the question, what does resilience mean to you? These are some of the answers that the kids gave me. And also on the right-hand side, you can see I have some examples of school posters. And these posters, I can tell you, are all over the places of the built environment of the schools. So I'll let you read them first. And then I would like to know what you see from this part. You can either type or you can just chime in and say a few words. So I'm very interested to know what do you think? What do you see from here, from the data here? Do we have any volunteer to chime in an idea or anything? I'm checking the chat boxes.
Yeah, someone said lots of individual narratives, lots.
Yeah, a lot of them, you're very correct. So they're all about bouncing back, recovery, adaptation, keep trying, keep reviving, keep doing things. And children's discourses actually beautifully aligns with the school posters I saw in the school. So this is the first thing I came to my attention. And also, next slide, my slide is not moving.
Oh. Tom, are you able to help?
Perhaps I think it's my problem.
If it's not moving, I'm not sure what to suggest.
Okay, it works. So when I further asked these children, where did you get the ideas about resilience? And these are some of the examples. This is what they told me. Again, I would like you to read them first. And I'd be very interested to know what you see in this part of the data. Yeah, if you see anything interesting in the data, feel free to just type or just chime in and say a few words. I've been reading the chat box, and some of you said these children are very motivated and hold very positive adaptivity towards challenges, and they would be able to, some of them recover slowly and others recover immediately. Yes, so these discourses portrays a very positive image about resilience and about resilient children. And if we look at the data here, what I see from the data is the model achievers and the super functioning kids are used as tools to build the resilience of children in schools. Is there any problem with model minority kids? Is there any issue with super functioning discourse? Are you comfortable with that? Does anyone have a different view towards this positive construct of resilience? Feel free to share your ideas if you want. I'd be very interested to know, what do you think? Yes, it would create a deficit model in the classroom. So because the model achievers was created as a beautiful image. So if somebody else can do that, you can do that. If you can't do that, it's your own problem. So model achievers, the discourse of model achievers was used as a tool in school to penalize those children who, for some reason, were not able to be resilient. So that was used as a tool to say it was your problem. You should be blamed for not being able to be resilient. If you look at other kids, they were able to be resilient, why you can't? So this is the reason why I don't feel totally comfortable with the notion of recovery, adaptation, persistency, and consistency. On the positive side, they create a very beautiful and positive image about children. But this positive image cloaks all the structural problems behind the scenes. So this is what I see, one of the problems of resilience building in school. Our school system hasn't been very successful in many different things. But as far as I can see, our schools are very successful in terms of communicating the resilience message to the children. through everyday discourses, through school curriculum, through all the posters at the assembly, etc., etc. So this image of resilience building was clearly communicated to children, and children got it. So this is what amazed me, that our education is fairly successful in communicating that type of information to children. So as you can see, resolution has a positive image, but the positive image does cloaks the structural barriers and the structural problems in our school system, because it's so individualized. Now let's move on to the next strategy. Is what I call reconciliation. So reconciliation is about adaptation and negotiation. So when I ask the question, how do you cope with the challenge at school? This is what Gabriela told me. And again, I'll let you read them first, and then you can just tell us what you see in this data. So does anyone want to volunteer an idea? What do you think stand out from this piece of data? So what I see is this type of resilience focuses very much on adaptation. So whenever you have a problem, go and grab resilience. Go and become adaptive to the whatever and however problematic situation. So if we focus too much on individual level adaptation through resilience building, again, the problematic situation started to reinforce themselves, started to reproduce themselves, because all we have to do in the face of adversity is to adapt to the problem situation rather than questioning the problems in the situation. And very interestingly, if you look at what the teachers have done to Gabriela, the teacher said, don't talk your language because you might be talked bad about. For me, I think teachers all have a good heart. There was nothing wrong with that from an individual level. Teachers just wanted to help Gabriela to not be bullied at school, so that they suggested Gabriela not to talk about their home language. And again, this is the strong connotation of adaptation to the English hegemony in schools. Interestingly, Australia is a self-declared multicultural state. But as you can see, at least in some of the schools I visited, not necessarily they're multilingual and multicultural, the English hegemony and the English dominance are prevalent in their schools. They asked children from immigrant backgrounds to adapt to the English background for the sake of survival and thriving in this system, rather than questioning what's going on with English domination. Is there anything we can do differently to really achieve multiculturalism and multilingualism in Australian schools? So all these connotations of adaptation cloak these structural issues. And this is what I see another problem of resilience building. It is good intentioned, but it is problematic. The next strategy, give me a few seconds, the slides is not moving. It's what I call recalcitrance. Recalcitrance is largely about resistance and revenge. And here's some background about Alex. Alex is a boy who was labeled as a little monster in school. He needed a lot of disciplines. And when I asked him, how would he react to things or people you dislike? And this is what he told me. And I will let you read the data. Yeah, from the first piece of data, we can see Alex was very resistant to the regular pedagogy of the schools. And he wasn't engaged in any of the school activities because he thought it was a waste of time. He had an opportunity to go to the school council, but he didn't take that opportunity because he think it didn't worth it. And later on, as our conversation going on, I found that Alex was a self-trained zoologist. During the interviews I had with Alex, he lectured me very well about zoology, and he found some of the information in the book was so wrong. So he collected scientific evidence to prove them so wrong. He told me that cheetahs are actually not the fastest animal in the world. Falcons are actually the fastest animals in the world. So he had resistance to the pedagogical authority of the teachers. And also he had resistance to the school authority in terms of the authorized knowledge in the textbooks. So there was a tendency of self-exclusion from the school system because the school system wasn't made for him, because the school system was excluding him already. That's where I see his resistance and revenge coming from. When I read this piece of data, I thought about Bourdieu, I thought about Giroux, I thought about Paul Whitty's work, all about resistance to and self-exclusion from an excluding social spaces like school. So again, recalcitrance was able to claim power, but it faced the risk of being further marginalized in the school system. And the next one was about retreat. And this data was very interesting as well. When I asked how we react to things and people you dislike, Salim and Jamal told me these. I'd like you to read the data quickly. So what did you see in this data? Are there any common things that you can find out between Salim and Jimon? I think one of the common things between them was they both are able to withdraw from a stressful situation. They knew when to give up on something that is not worthwhile. They knew when to leave a place that is so toxic and that is not worthwhile. So this is what they did to the bullies or to the impolite and racism discourses towards them. They were not necessarily cowards who only escaped from a problematic situation. Rather, it was a strategic withdrawal from that situation. So they hollowed out the power foundations of the bullies because they just didn't want to spend any time with them. They don't care about them. So they made them powerless without taking any power. So this is what I see the strength of the strategy, resilience strategy of retreat. And let's move on to the next one, redirection. So redirection was actually very straightforward. It usually had 3 steps. Step 1, withdraw, temporarily withdraw from a problematic situation. And secondly, entered into a temporary secondary. And thirdly, they were able to find alternative options and they were able to redirect themselves back on track and try to come up with alternative solutions. I'm mindful of the time, so I better quickly move on. So perhaps we don't need to read this data. And reconstruction, this is something I found very interesting. It is an important resilience strategy because it fights against the view that our society doesn't allow for any failure. Failure was demonized. Failure was stigmatized. Failure was for losers. But if you read this data, you can see all these children were able to positively reframe failure. I'll give you a few moments so that you can read this data. So I guess what these children are telling us was, at some point in our life, we're all going to fail and fall. If we do have to fail and fall, if we positively reframe failure, we can fall positively and fail productively so that we can fare well in the future eventually. So reconstruction failure positively was a resilience strategy that is forward-looking, that is for the future. It's not necessary for the time being. It is not necessary for well-being. It is good for the future. It is good for well-becoming. So I think from these discourses, these children taught us to fight against the negative view towards failure. Failure shouldn't be constructed negatively. Failure shouldn't be for losers. We can do failure productively, like these children do. And the final resilience strategy is what I call reflexivity. It is about relational positionality that's taken by these children. This is a focus group interview I did with grade 9 students in a school in Caboolture. Once again, I'll let you read this. And you can just type if you see anything interesting in this data. So what I see from this data is these children were able to relate themselves to the situation, relate themselves to the positions of other people, and they were able to create a hypothetical situation in terms of what they would do if they were in that similar situation. So again, this is forward-looking, focusing on the future, focusing on their own hypothesis, so they can reconstruct what's going on at this moment. And similarly, I asked the same question: what would you do if you see someone in a difficult situation? Savasa told me this, and I'd like you to read this quickly. And also when I asked a different question, what are the things or people you dislike at school? Andy told me this, and please read Andy's comments. So as you can see, I asked different questions and obviously got different responses from Savata and Andy. But what I do see, the common things between these two kids were actually the self-correction when they talk to me. So if we look at Samantha's case, he said his mates were not as high achieving as himself. And then he said, no, not like that, not like that. They're getting the same results as me. They get lower, and then if they don't understand the concept, they come to me because I am able to explain to them. So he was able to reposition themselves in relation to his peers, and he was able to self-correct his language, which is fraught with a lot of power. And then he used a kind of power-free language to remove the power imbalances between himself and his the so-called lower achieving kids. So this is what I found fascinating about Samantha's data. And similarly, if you look at Andy also got a self-correction. And again, it was a revisit to the position of himself. And both of them were able to relook at their position in relation to their peers. So this is another resilience strategy that I call reflexivity. With reflexivity, they were able to question the usually invisible power imbalances, and they were able to shift the power imbalances within their everyday educational exercises. So putting them together, this is the MultiRs model of sociology of resilience. As you can see, there are 7 resilience, and I'm hoping that I've shown you the data that all these resilience strategies go together, and they are highly contentious because there are a lot of tensions around each of them. Back to the comment I made at the very beginning, resilience, if we restarted it from a sociological point of view, it wasn't always a positive construct. There were tensions, there were contestations surrounding this notion. I'm gonna skip this part because this is just a quantitative analysis of the 7 resilience strategies. Basically, my quant analysis aligns with my qualitative analysis. And finally, this is just some of the questions and remarks I would like to make if we do and think resilience sociologically. So I would like to ask 2 questions. Shall we ask people in few pool houses to wrap up themselves and keep warm? Or shall we ask them to pour what has gone wrong with the house? And the second question, shall we teach people to avoid being hit by a rock? Or shall we encourage people to ponder over who throws that rock and why? I don't have any simple answers to these 2 questions, but what I think is psychology of resilience focuses very much on the first bit of these 2 questions. But sociology of resilience tends to answer yes to all of these questions. So thinking and doing resilience sociologically is to first struggle to survive and thrive in a constraining system resiliently, then to take issue with it and dismantle its arbitrary power by the power obtained through it. I guess this is the final message I want to communicate through my talk today. And here are just some of the references which I find might be useful if you're interested in resilience research. And these are some of my publications about resilience over the past few years, if you're interested. So thank you again, everyone. I think I used more time than I was supposed to, but I still have a few minutes so that I welcome your comments and questions.
Thank you very, very much, Michael. It's a really interesting talk, and we have learned so much. I mean, myself, I won't really say anything on behalf of the others, but I have learned so much from this multi-model of resilience model. Very, very interesting. So anyone has a question? No?
I have a, oh, sorry. Yes. I raised their hand, I think.
Please go.
Work away.
Kenji.
Hi, Dr. Mu. It's really, really interesting study, and I like the narratives a lot. But I do wonder a question about how this resilience is whether it is appreciated or how it's understood by the peer students and the authority, for example, the teachers. Because as I observed in these narratives, normally these students' resilience happen within themselves. They talk to themselves. They are good listeners. They receive information from teachers very well. But it seems like they don't realize they are influencer as well. People can learn from them, can learn the resilience from them. But I wonder whether the students who do not share similar experience can understand and appreciate this resilience, or they may see it as a threat because it's indeed some advantage of these children. So that's my question. Thank you. It's a really interesting study.
Thank you so much, Tianqi. That was a great question. And yes, indeed, I guess my research is telling me how can we look at resilience a little differently, because resilience was taught in school as a so positive construct. As you rightly picked up, that resilience was all about yourself, self-help, self-regulation, self-organization. Whenever you have any difficulties, go and grab resilience and you will be fine. If you aren't able to be resilient, that's your problem. So blame yourself for not being able to be resilient. So it is a very positive construct. We teach resilience with a good intention. But however, by teaching resilience too positively, actually we cloaks a lot of structural barriers that are responsible for a major part of all the adversities. So it directed our educational attention from the structural constraints. All we focus is to build strong and resilient children. We barely teach these children how can we question the system. But how can we question the system? It's kind of dangerous question. Like, how critical do we want our kids to become? What is the bottom line? And this is the question that I've been pondering over all through the years. That's why, I do these picture books. And one of your question is, would these kids rationally or consciously understand what they're doing? Are they able to critically decode what the school systems are due to them in terms of resilience building? So that's why I did this picture book. So I use all the knowledges and the lessons I learned from these children, and I use their vocabularies and everyday languages. I hope they can get some part of the criticality and reflexivity, but not being too critical. When I mean not being too critical, I mean not being too radical, not being too cynical. So there's a boundary there, because we can't teach children to be too sociologically resilient. So this is how I view resilience. It is a puzzle. It is indeed a puzzle. It is a puzzle for myself, and I think it is a puzzle for education.
We have another question from Burke.
Yep. Hiya. Thank you. Thanks very much. It was a really interesting paper. I was wondering about resilience in the context of power, right? And sort of thinking about like a little bit as well then in terms of Bourdieu. And when you're talking about like ideas around like resistance and how that can be like an aspect then of resilience, and you linked it back to some of them to some of Willis's work, and the sort of then the counter argument, I guess, to Willis from people like Vacan and Bourdieu is that whenever you actually distance yourself from those systems, what you actually do is just reproduce those systems and actually opt out of them and actually do that system a favor, because it actually gets rid of you and it then actually reproduces the only privilege for everybody else. And so I was wondering, in terms of like, when we think about resilience more sociologically, are we still thinking about it in terms of of power and of like social mobility and social justice, or is it something else?
Great question, Sierra. Thank you so much for linking Bourdieu, Paul Whitty's work and Girard's work together. They are the common thing across them, as you rightly picked up, is the resistance thinking, and perhaps they children who are too resistant would be caught in a trap because they are facing with two equally bad outcomes. They either resist the system and exclude themselves from the system and being further marginalized by the system, or they had to change themselves to adapt to the system. So they are facing two equally bad situations. And I think this is what Bourdieu talked about, these resistant children. So by doing and thinking sociological resilience sociologically, I wonder whether you can still see my last slide. So I think my core or my invitation is to, as I said, to first struggle to survive and thrive in the however constraining system. But then we don't forget where we are coming from. We need to take easy with the system. We need to dismantle the arbitrary power by the power we obtain through it. The problem for many people who haven't done resilience sociologically is that by the stage we come to the powerful position, we forgot where we came from. We were so used to the system, and we've been like fish in water in Bourdieu's term. So we forgot to take easy with the system because we are the beneficiaries of the system. And why would we bother to take easy with the system? But this is what I think we need, why we should do resilience sociologically, so we don't forget where we're coming from. We achieve mobility, we achieve and we climb to a powerful position, but we need to take issue with the arbitrary power by using the power we obtain through the system.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's really interesting, sort of that idea of this sort of the like balance, or this sort of like negotiation of it as well, rather than these sort of like blunt ideas which we've had previously, you know, like in some of that research. So yeah, thanks very much. I'm really looking forward to the book coming out as well. I think it's August, isn't it? So yes, it'll be a birthday present for me actually. So yeah, looking forward to it.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. I think we have one more questions from the audience. Does anyone want to ask this last question? Who is that raising the hand? I can't pick it up. Okay.
Hi, Xiaolan.
Hi, Sherry.
Yeah, hi, good morning.
Go ahead.
Hi, Professor Mumu. Sorry, I'm in and out here, so I do not catch most of your sessions, but it's quite interesting. Just quickly, I want to know, actually, for China, those rural areas, such as the left behind children, and I do research on Chinese minorities, for example, the autonomous prefecture. Actually, the government has invested very heavily in these regions already. So if you go to this region or remote area, the hardware of those villages or towns have been quite good already. But as we read from the media, it has been reported frequently for generations. The ethnic minority groups, such as the Yi, have always been on the bottom of the whole country. You know, their GDP has always lagged behind. So I want to know what kind of impact our research can really make to make a change.
That is a good and difficult question.
Yeah. Thank you.
What I would see is a collective intellectual activism. So that would make a change. This is what I learned from Bourdieu's career later in his work. So later in his career, Bourdieu became less academically, less scholarly, but more politically, so that his ideas would be going wider to the community. So as researchers, I think we are in a position to share ideas within a wider audience. And that also prompts me to do the picture book. So that I really can return what I've learned to the communities, to the families and children, so that I can a wider audience and it create a dialogic space for contestations, for arguments, for questioning the questions that we've never questioned before. So I would call collective intellectual activism. I think we publish too much in scholarly journals, and that for me is a dead end, because we are doing communications with ourselves. We are doing our communication within the academia. We haven't really communicated our ideas to a wider audience. But sadly, the academic system doesn't encourage us to step out of the academia. For example, the picture book and for all the median columns I wrote, my university just doesn't recognize that because it doesn't help with the university ranking. I think I'm a bit sidetracked, but I think my major response to your question is to do some collective intellectual activity to make things happen and to put theory to work in action.
I think that's where resilience can get, have a role to play, because it's really important to get them involved and let them do something about themselves, rather than we as a outsider. Because as I said, if you go to those villages and towns, the hardware are really very good, but still we still consider that, for example, that region or that area is still lag behind or very poor. So I think maybe it's the people there themselves should do something about their lives.
Good comment. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you all. And there is one comment, I should just read it. It's from Danwei, said, thank you, Michael. Insights and reflections from a Chinese tiger mother. She called herself tiger mother. When children talk about resilience by themselves, it seems to me as a meta-resilience knowledge. The meta-knowledge allows older children or elder children to build up the resilience. As a parent, I also hope I could make the resilience a habitus so that I could be benefit her in the future, but in the long run. Yeah, I think I benefit her future in the long run. Well, I think we all enjoyed the talk very, very much. I mean, personally, I think it's eye-opening. I mean, this is sociological perspective of looking at resilience. Really make me think about my own work. I do lots of work on families, about younger children. So the way that how they can maintain their language or develop multiple languages can all tie in with this resilience model. I think I have lots of data that I can use to look at the stories from the parents from this resilience model perspective. And I would like to thank Dr. Mu very, very much for sharing his publications and knowledge and research with us. I hope that we have more chance to chat with you in the future. I am aware of the time that I set up here, so I think we'll have to stop now because everyone is busy. Unless, of course, you have other questions, but maybe you can send it to me or send it to Dr. Mu directly. We will upload the video as soon as we have edited or get approval from the university media center. So thank you, Michael, again. Thank you so much for this wonderful talk.
And thank you so much, Xiaolan, for organizing this. And thank you, everyone, for this opportunity. And also your comments are very encouraging and very thought-provoking. I would love to get in contact with you in the future, and we talk about resilience, or I would be very interested to know your research in future terms. And thank you again, everyone, for having me tonight.
Thank you.